Hello, hello, committees out there everywhere. My name is Elrock617. Today I'm going to be bringing you a submission video for the PlayStation 3 digital download version of the arcade version of X-Men from back in 1992. Now, I don't know if I discussed this enough during my 4-player submission video, but this game, while it does have generalized speedrun categories, like, any percent per version, because this game has like 10 different ROM sets and they're all different, they all are based on credit feeding runs that involve mutant power spam. Now, for those that want to run that, I think that's perfectly fine. Me, I prefer to go the 1 credit route and make sure that I'm not doing that because mutant powers at the end of the day do cost health. So, for this game, I've already gotten my 4-player video to be looked at. So today we're going to show the 6-player. This is from a stream from, I believe it was 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, yes. So I remember it was 2 or 3. Where I actually PB'd in this category, this 1cc category with Storm. She's the only character I'm going to be submitting this game for because while the other 5 characters all have their upsides, Storm is by far the most reliable, and it's not close. So, let's go ahead and get her started. Volume's a little low. Let me pick that up.
The big thing to note about 6P is that you have to be, well...
Okay, so the interesting thing about the 6-player version is I do believe it's actually a bit more difficult than the 4-player version overall for very specific reasons that I'll get into. But as it turns out, it's also faster. My 4-player PB on the PS3 version is, I think it's a 30-28, I believe it was when I timed it last time. Whereas this run is actually a sub-30. This was like a high 28, like a 2850X. So we're playing the Japanese ROM set. The level design for both games between JP and US is actually completely different. More important than that, in the JP version you get an expanded moveset with every character, and Storm gets to take the best advantage of this. In the US version of the game, Storm already has the best range, and here she just gets improved range. What you saw there was her 3A attack. It's a diagonal down forward input to be able to touch a Sentinel or other enemy from that far away and be able to get your combo in. The range on it is incredible. The hitbox is disgusting, especially when you have the high ground. It's the most valuable move that you have outside of maybe throw. But the difference between that and throw is that throw is not consistent. As you can see for the 6-player version, it's quite a bit more expanded, which makes segments like this a little bit more interesting. Instead of having Sentinels just condense themselves like they normally would, they appear on both sides of the screen and there's way more range around them. Which to me is one of the big reasons why the 6-player version is harder, is because you have a lot more projectile and like not so much invincibility, but you have to take on a lot more awareness of them because they can just hit you from just about anywhere. The Pyro Fight I actually tend to enjoy quite a bit more on 6P for this reason. I like to be able to do that cross-up strat and go behind him and hit him, and he can't really get away from that. Sometimes he iframes and then that happens. Sometimes I like to try to catch him while he's airborne because it's really fun. But we finished him off anyway. Really easy fight. I believe in the first and last cycles he does get iframes after the first hit and second hit respectively. So for stage 2, it started with the 4-player version. Both these doors do open, but you don't have access to both of them. The other 2 enemies spawn off screen. You also only have 2 of these giant green Samuses, I refer to them as after Samus Aran, to fight instead of 3. Pretty interesting. I don't know why that'd give you less enemies, but here we are. The other reason why I'm pretty sure this is faster than 4P is because since the screen is so wide, you get to scroll the screen a heck of a lot more consistently than you do in 4P. We also fight these turrets a little bit later than we would in 4. Unfortunately, we took that hit so early, but we'll be able to make that back. Another thing to note, the 2-player JP version, which is unfortunately not available in this digital download, has health ups, in addition to additional mutant power stocks. You don't have that luxury here. They only are available on co-op runs, so we're kind of just forced into health management. Now see, there's the other thing about 6P that I was mentioning earlier. Projectiles are just disgusting. They have the full screen with which to work with, and it's our job to be able to make sure we can work around them. Dive helps a lot. Dive covers a lot of ground. Doesn't help against green Samuses because they have anti-air potential. But the red guys, you can just kind of just jump in on them, like so. I do it a lot just to make sure I keep them in check. Putting those guys on the floor is a good place for them to be. Do a quick air attack to take out those turrets. Whoosh it on in. That's the first part of the game where we actually use a mutant power. We have to. It requires us to spend our stock that we start the game with. We only start the game with 1 mutant power stock. And we only get an additional one if we take a death. So if this ends up being not a no-miss run, but still a 1cc, we'll have obtained 1 additional mutant power stock. Past that, it takes 3 health to be able to use one. That is something we'll be forced to do at certain points, but that won't be for a while. Also, this green Samus does not exist on the 4-player version, so this segment's technically a little bit harder because more enemies, but still not a huge deal. Similar to the 4-player version, we're going to be fighting Blob here. Blob's pretty easy with Storm. Her range just completely outclasses anything he can do. He cannot fight this move at all.
Things get weird. The Blob fight I learned,
Explaining in the background the Blob fight with the different character. I think I was referring specifically to Colossus. There's some weird iframes ticks that apply to other characters between the two versions. Storm doesn't really care. If Blob ever like stands still and gains iframes, that's the boss cue for when they are in invincibility state. They kind of just stand there and do nothing. But the scared factor is that if you approach them while they're in that state, they get to hit you for free.
oh my god.
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
That was perfect.
Zoning's pretty gross. I tried to jump in and they clipped me right as I was about to hit his body. So in this stage, this to me is like one of the indicators of how hard this game is going to be. Ordinarily, the Lizards are some of Storm's harder matchups. They become a little bit more manageable in 6P just because of the amount of space that you have. They can jump pretty far with their tail whip, but we can condense that. Like, we can actually force them to come to us. Whereas with these Sentinels, well, with the Mangoes, as I refer to them as, while they do retain their old moveset, part of it gets significantly more threatening because of the fact that zoning is just better here. Like, they actually have access to a really powerful fireball that every Sentinel beyond this does have access to as well. And here it's just significantly harder to deal with because, one, it's really fast, and two, they can just check you from full screen. There's a perfect example. That guy was just willing to fire that from across the screen and just try to peg me. Had to dodge that too. Like, you see how fast that travels? Definitely the big reason why it's harder.
Anyway, I think these guys have
But
a lot less to offer.
I'm still willing to at least present the potential to show it off simply because most people know this version of the game. I mean, when people bring up X-Men Arcade, I feel like the first thing I always hear come from somebody about this game is the fact that they remember there was this giant 6-player cabinet, and I think that's cool. I think it's cool that people are willing to remember it for that reason. And to this day, I believe it's the only arcade side-scrolling brawler that has belt-scrolling, I should say, that had 6 playable characters available in 6 playable slots. You had, I think it was, forgot the name of the game, but there was a sequel to the game Rastin. I want to say it wasn't called Warriors of Fate, but that game had the dual monitor setup this did, but only had 3 characters. Whereas you had games like Gaia Crusaders where you had 7 characters after the mid-game unlock, but you could only have 4 players at a time. Whereas this game just ran the full gamut. You could play all 6 characters at once among 6 different players. Very memorable experience. I think first time I got to play was when I was 9 or 10, and yeah, it was a pretty big deal seeing this at the arcade for the first time, even though I wasn't an X-Men fan quite yet, but we'd get there. So this segment's pretty rough. It's a lot of room to work with, but these lizards are just kind of just all over the place. And of course they have assist calls and the fireballs from these Sentinels, which we don't want to have to deal with.
I still think JP 6-player is a bit easier, just because your moveset expansion. No. Leave me alone.
So what I touched on there about 6-player JP being easier, I was comparing it to the US version, not the 4-player JP version. The US version of 6P is... It's certainly challenging, and definitely I would say more challenging than this, but not necessarily for the same reasons or for the same indicators. Big reason being, I'm going to move the webcam over a little bit, it looks kind of goofy there. Big reason being is because the expanded moveset helps a lot. Storm also gains some additional properties in this variation. Her dive in the US version has additional recovery frames when it lands on the ground, so therefore it's just not optimal to use. Like, her dive is still useful, but it's not like here where I'm just diving around all over the place. And of course she doesn't retain her command normal, so she has to just fight kind of bare bones. Where she still has excellent range and can outrange a boss like Wendigo, no problem, but something about having this additional moveset just makes it that much more appealing, and it makes it faster. Because you can get them to chase you and just do cycles like that, and 9 cycles later and he's down. There's another boss who just can't deal with her range. Okay, for stage 4, for the 4-player version, I believe I referred to this as the first, like, actual hard stage. I don't feel that way about 6P. I think stage 3 is the first difficult one outside of the boss. But there is a lot that we have to be mindful of in this stage. Particularly any segment that involves Samuses. Once Samuses start getting range in stages like this, it just gets really dumb. We also have a segment with 4 lizards that can get pretty out of control. I don't mind necessarily fighting 1 or 2 of them at a time. 4 is a bit rough. This is also unique to this version. These guppies don't actually appear here. I believe we do have a segment where we get the 2 lizard men in addition to a few sentinels. But for the guppies, what I refer to those guys as there, not so much. You also may have noticed that before the Wendigo fight in the last stage, there were actually 6 guppies I had to fight, where there's only 4 and 4P. And this rendition has a few segments that are going to do that. They'll just follow the numbers of the number of players in the game, or that could play the game. They'll throw 4 enemies at you instead of 6, vice versa with this. That happens in this stage as well a bit later, and what I deem one of the hardest segments of the stage, unless you have access to mutant power. So for this stage in particular, health management is incredibly important, and that is the one very difficult thing I'll go into there at least. As in, like, I still think stage 3 is the first hard stage, but stage 4 is a challenge for definitely that reason. We'll see that soon enough, though. Bad Infinite still works in the corner. Storm's timing makes it to where she can just hit this no problem. I use the neutral hit, even though the down forward hit is faster, because if the down forward hit can actually shift you off alignment. These Samuses are also not here in 4P. And this part's actually really scary, because fighting them with 7 Sentinels spawning, not really ideal. Even though they're all on the same side of you. You still have fireballs to worry about, and you want to make sure you can take care of those Samuses really, really quickly. Like, before any of these guys spawn, so you don't have to deal with them all at once. The goal one day is to beat them up all at the same time, or all quickly enough to get to the top of the elevator with them all being dead. I think the only way to actually do that is with a mutant power, and it's just not worth it. We have a mutant power, I want to spin another part of the stage. Take out these guppies. These guys are standard. Also 4P friendly. That one I'm kind of surprised about. You couldn't see my webcam there, but I definitely had the people's eyebrow going there. I was shocked that guy got through all that. But hitboxes are weird in this game sometimes. It's just one of those things to be mindful of. This is pretty much the same as it is in 4, except the guy on the right spawns with a lot more range, so we gotta do a little bit more ground control and things like that. So here's our mutant power segment. 6 red Samuses. We don't want anything to do with that. I think there may be one run ever where I took all that on all at once and took less damage than a mutant power would have done to me. So it's just an investment at that point. It's worth the 3 health to get through that fast. It's too daunting to try to get through it, because if any of the red Samuses get to the other side of you, like to the left side of you while others are on the right, it just becomes a huge debacle, because when they flank you as an attack you from both sides, it's just too much to keep track of. You have fireballs coming at you from the left, from the right, you have guys trying to sneak in on you and do melee, and there's no friendly fire, so like it's all up to you about how to handle it. On to our boss. I actually kind of hate this. This guy coming in from the left, he always spawns after the boss does, which I think is just a silly programming tick to have. Nimrod fights about the same as he does in 4P. I actually think he might be a little bit easier here, because the amount of space that we gain in this stage is actually not beneficial to him. Our whole goal is we just want to keep him at the wall. But we also can run away and get around the stuff he does. The laser that you see there is the one attack that we're scared of, but because of all the amount of space that we have, it's easier to get away from. That was scary, though. I threw that on his wake up, and he denied me, and that was... I legitimately feared for it there. It does 3 damage, and we're at 5, so that is something to be cautious of. Still doing it there. He is throwing out that spam alert. Checking his email. One drama queen later, he explodes, and we get to move on. Pretty reasonable stage. The knockdown prior to the Samuses was something weird, but not a bad stage 4 all in all. Alright, so stage 5. First thing to note right away, we don't actually fight Samuses in 4P here. Not right away. We get, I think it's 3 or 4 of these green Sentinels. And then, like, I think it's like 2 or 3 Samuses. But they separate. Like, you fight one segment, then you fight the other segment. Here, they just throw 2 at you at the same time of each. Big upside here, we get this hole to work with. This hole is great. If enemies are willing to walk into our path and allow us to hit them, we're just going to knock them right in. So these turrets are cycle-based. I'm not going to dive in on them. You can clear that, but it's hard. I wouldn't even want to begin to count how many pixels it is. It's probably like a less than 4 pixel window, which doesn't seem that huge, but it's one of those things that generally isn't smart to go for, because if you miss it, you're just going to get bodied. Like, you're going to take a lot of damage from those turrets.
I'm not sure how it felt
Also missing not fighting Samus is here. We'll see him here in a little bit, but there's actually 2 that normally spawn before this, but now we've got 3, so guess we got our wish. You see all the OTGs there. OTGs for option selects, as are referred to in the 4-player run, are actually not quite as important in the 6-player version, just because of the amount of space that you have. The reason the reason option selects are so good there is because enemies are trying to swarm you, whereas here they're trying to zone you. And I don't even mean specifically this section, I mean like throughout the course of the game. That was a really good double kill. I wasn't sure that kick was going to have the range to take out that guppy chilling in the background, but we clipped him.
Did not love taking 2 damage there, but we can play this.
Took a little bit of a chunk to our health. We're going to fight our midway boss, the White Queen, also known as Emma Frost. Not sure why none of that hit her. I should have just gone for the 3A first, I guess. White Queen operates on cycles. In her 3rd cycle, after the 2nd hit, we have to dodge and then come back and hit her again. And then we do the same in the 6th cycle, which is her last cycle. Actually, I guess it's the 5th one. Oh, well. Not sure why I thought it was the 6th. I mean, she dies after 6 cycles, but I thought the other bout of iframes happened there. Could be a ROM thing. I'm really not sure. I remember. These little drones are not too difficult to deal with. Get into the corner and just chip them away.
How many Samus is here? 3.
My goal here, as soon as these guys land, is to take out the red one immediately. Like, I don't anticipate killing him. That was rude, by the way. That fireball from downtown. This game is ready to give it to me. But the red one, I think I mentioned this before, but the red one, when you have to fight groups of Samuses that are different colors, red is always the most threatening because they can fight you on the ground. The green ones have a melee to hit you on the ground with, but their missile attack is an anti-air. I think it only hits Colossus while grounded if he's shooting upward. It can hit any character coming down, but then it's just like a shot of napalm. You can just dodge it. So they're not as much of a concern to me. The red ones have to go. I can fight Sentinels and green Samuses, but Sentinels, a green and a red, that's a day. That's not a fun day. Keep swiping at these guys. From here, it's mostly just beat 'em up stuff, so this would probably be a really good like donation period to discuss, because it's just more enemies up until the end. There is another new enemy we're going to be seeing here before too long. Also, this segment of Samus is gross. I can scroll forward. That was unfortunate. They lined up perfectly to hit me with that. They fired one. If you're a Street Fighter fan, you could say they fired high tiger shot, low tiger shot at the same time. Hard to deal with. I tried to work my way around it and it didn't work. Oh well. But you can see why those guys are such a threat together now. Sentinels are fairly simple. They're reminiscent of the Stage 1 Sentinels. They don't have any projectile attacks. They can just melee you, but that makes them easier to deal with because Storm is a queen of melee. Okay, we got 2 Guppy spawns that are really far apart in 6P. Don't love that, but here's the new enemies we see. These are Bone Breakers. For anyone who's played Punisher Arcade, he was a boss in that game, but for those that haven't, they're just one of a group of mutant cyborgs called Reapers. Best thing to do against them is just group them up against the wall and then just take them out that way. These Sentinels also had no projectiles, so we're just making sure that we can outspace them. They can't shoot us from far away. They're just going to keep trying to swarm us, and we're just going to keep batting them away. Sometimes they sneak punches in. Really unfortunate when that happens, but just got to make sure it doesn't. That didn't even feel greedy to me, really. I just didn't know how that didn't clip him. Alright, so Juggernaut, I think, on 6P is an interesting fight. I'm not sure if it's harder than 4 or not. I use the same strat where I try to get it to bait him over to come to the left side and then work his way back up. Like here. Sometimes he fires the gun and we just kind of have to go back and do this. But if he charges at me, then I let him work his way back to the right and going up. And then take him out that way. Other than that, it's just strict range. Keep with your 3A, obtain the high ground. Once you have the high ground against Juggernaut, he becomes significantly less threatening. The gun is still a threat because it has a built-in like back sway to it, so it has some defensive properties. And the gun does 3 damage and it's really fast. But because the 3A recovers so fast, you can usually get out of the way before it, unless he does it like what's referred to as a psychic maneuver of it, which means that he does it before you do your input. The game can bait you sometimes with that, but something to deal with. It's arcades. Alright, on to stage 6. I firmly believe that for Storm, this is the hardest stage in the game, even over the final stage that has the gigantic boss rush. This stage is very short, but the problems are just non-stop. Starting off is honestly not too bad, because we only have Sentinels to deal with, and we have a pit that we can knock them into. But what's significant is that this is the first stage where Sentinels have double health what they started with in stage 3. Double or 0.5 more, I forget. It can take upwards of 3 knockdowns to knock them down. And the other problem being that if you try to OTG them with any attack, even Storms, which is like the most powerful, then what's going to happen is they'll still take damage, of course, but it takes a lot longer to kill them. Just because their health to standard hits and not knockout hits is just really, really high. Knock that guy. And I'm going to wait out the turret here.
Give it a moment. Now I'll jump it. Yeah, that's bad.
Did not want that to happen. Not going to lie. Especially now with like all these guys coming here. Like the problem with this is that white sentinel on the far left can actually shoot me from there, and he's going to attempt to, as you can see. Like they're just ready to unload. Hard to be mindful of something that's happening all the way on the other side of a double 4x3 screen. You know, it's like, well, you don't know what's happening, so that was unfortunate. Like that was just basically from off screen. Didn't love that. This stage is shorter than what we experienced in 4P based on the number of enemy segments. Really didn't want all this to spawn just yet, but we'll take out the Pyros with mutant power nonetheless. We manipulate them all to the center. You have 5 of those guys to fight there instead of 4, and they spawn from 2 different sides of the screen. You get 2 from the left and 3 from the right instead of 4 from just one direction. But the strat is still the same. Spawn them while you're on the left side of the screen, throw a tornado, and they're all gone. So here we have Bone Breakers to fight. And what's significant here is in 4-player, Bone Breakers don't end the stage. We only have to fight 4 of them, and then there's like a wave of, I think, 5 white sentinels. But there, it's just like 8 bone breakers, and then we're done. And onto our boss, who I firmly believe is Storm's hardest boss fight. The Living Pharaohs are intriguing. Giving them more space, I actually think, does make it a bit easier. But it is also really easy to get greedy in this fight, I think. Because trying to make sure you can maintain hits, see, that was a big whiff. I threw the 9A attack, which does have good range, and I feel like would have hit if he had come straight down, but he decided to diagonal it. So these guys love their Z-axis. They do have their circular movement. They only have the 1 attack, but it's such a massive threat, you always have to be on the watch out for it. That double scythe swing is just disgusting. It doesn't damage on the first hit, but on the second hit, it causes knockdown, and it's 3 damage, and it has a lot of iframes past a certain point. The middle Pharaoh gains access to a couple more attacks that feature eye lasers that aren't generally that threatening because you can interrupt it most of the time. That one, I don't even know how that happened. Like, I feel like that was just the game doing game things. I am at 1 health, though, so I'd have to resort to playing safe here. Didn't love this. I'm also now on my last life for the credit. On PlayStation 3, regardless of which version you play, 4P, 6P, USJP, on the normal difficulty, you get only 2 lives. Or you get 4 lives, but I treat it like 2 live credits. Much as the arcade would. The default settings is 2 lives, that's what I play. So if I were to lose my next life, then the 1cc run would be dead. This stage I feel is quite a bit shorter. I haven't quite timed it out, but you definitely have to fight less enemy groups because of the amount of space that you have with which to deal with all these guys and, you know, force them to spawn and all that good stuff. Like, we're already spawning turrets in our second segment. I'm also very surprised that that one didn't try to snipe me from there. That one was dirty. He fired a shot, but then he had a second shot ready once I dove in. Their reaction time is pretty extraordinary. Big part of what makes them so difficult to fight. Plus, they do 2 damage when they touch you, and it only takes 1 hit. It's filthy. The best thing to do against them is to just get enough height on your jump before diving that you don't have to worry about those tagging you. But sometimes they can anticipate that and back up and try to snipe you that way. See you again. Still zoning from all the way across screen. Even this gold sentinel's getting into the party mode of it by just throwing rocket arms at me. A couple more turrets here. I'm surprised the screen doesn't stop when these guys spawn. That's a normal thing for turrets, but here they're just like, nah, you just have to deal with them. Had to delay that one a little bit. Few bone breakers. There's, I think, 3 segments of bone breakers. I believe 4P you have to fight. I think it's 3 at a time, but it might be 4. There we had to fight 4 for sure. And here we have 4, but they're all separated. Like, I prefer them to all be grouped together, but I think there's some manip to that I haven't quite figured out. Because sometimes I feel like I get them to all group together like I want them to, but here, that absolutely did not happen. Alright, past the bone breakers, we don't have more sentinels to fight like on 4P, which is cool, so probably another reason why it's faster. So we're going to start our boss rush. Have 6 bosses to fight here.
I feel like there's just too much space here.
For what I like to do with Blob, I like to try to drag him up top because while we can outrange him pretty much anywhere, I want to try and condense him so that way I can fight him to a point where he's not going to spawn the next wave of bosses, which will be Wendigo. And I'm going to try and keep him over that way. The wall is our friend here.
Don't hit me. Hey, if you're just going to keep talking, like, I'm fine with that. Good time.
That's absolutely true. Anytime he taunts, it's a free hit.
Here, Wendy.
Like, he can't actually break it.
Get your Baconator.
That's the case with most bosses in this game. If Nimrod's screaming at you, he's not going to be able to defend himself. Blob's telling you what moves him. Same thing. So for Wendigo, it's just another spacing battle. I don't mind this fight as much as Blob because Blob just tends to have really rigidy movement. Like, he basically moves like a boulder with legs, very thumpy. Nimrod does the same thing, and it almost has a psychological effect on the player. At least for me, it does.
This is the cool thing about 6. Sometimes
so with Emma, we're going to have her move to the left, which is exactly what we want. She was very, very cooperative there.
What's up, Drum?
She's actually, I think, a bit more cooperative on 6P than 4P in my experience. Same fight, though. Know where her iframes are, get out, and get in. And then she's finished.
Nimrod, I can just outrange.
As mentioned there, with Nimrod, you can kind of just go in and just hit. You still have to be mindful of laser, and I would love to be able to have a wall with which to fight him. But he also has... How do I put this? He also has reduced cycles. He doesn't take 9 cycles to defeat. He only takes 6. Much is the case with most bosses here. I think the only exception to that is Emma takes 5 cycles as opposed to 6, whereas the others are like 6 as opposed to 9.
That's right. Love to see that get in. I am not a part of the game selection committee for that marathon.
Dodging lasers. I think it's one more cycle from here. But yeah, this is where Storm shines. Her range is just so exceptional. We also do have another mutant power stock in case we need it. So the fact that I'm at 6 life, while not irrelevant, doesn't scare me as much because I do have a Crux. Similar with Emma, I want Jugs to go to the left, but that doesn't always happen. I love to have that with any boss, but a lot of them are very stubborn and don't allow that to happen. Think like particularly Blob and Nimrod because their movement is just so stilted. Whereas Juggernaut, despite the fact that he's 8.5 feet tall, he can still move like a cruiserweight. Didn't love that. What I like to do is be able to hit him and have him come up, but if he goes back to the side movement like that, that's not good. A lot harder to get that down in 6P, but it's still a very manageable fight just because you're Storm and you have incredible range. Now in 4P, Mystique is probably my least favorite boss fight in the game with most characters. Pharaoh for Storm, but Mystique is up there. 6P, it's a little bit more manageable because you have a lot more room to work with. The big scare of Mystique is that if she knocks you down with her kick, which is a melee attack, and it's a very, very fast one, it does 3 damage and causes knockdown, and if it puts you in the corner, she can just kill you. On 6P, that's a lot less likely to happen because of the amount of space that you have. Now, granted, if it does happen, you have to regroup, and that's hard, but you're at least not dead. We've got one more cycle here. I can also take the option to use a mutant power there to finish her off, but I had enough health to where I wasn't really scared of that. I figured if she knocked me down, then I would be okay.
My internet was out all day yesterday.
Didn't need to.
It sucked.
So we rescued the professor, but we're not quite done yet.
Real bad.
We still gotta go fight Magneto. And I actually think Magneto is probably a little bit easier here than 4P. Not for speed reasons, but the fact that we have this much space means we know where he is at all times, whereas like on 4P the screen will scroll with us while he follows us, whereas I'd rather just know where he is. And of course react to things like shield. Shield can't dominate the screen in 6P the same way it can in 4P. Like if he shields, like he's pretty much covering almost the entire screen, regardless of whether or not you're close to him. The attacks to watch out for, of course, shield is degenerate. It does 2 damage, and he can do it. He can do it to cancel out a hit stun, which is really filthy. Fireball does 4. It's pretty easy to dodge, but we still want to get hit by it just because of how much damage it does. He does have the fireball that he can do out of shield, which I think does less. I believe it does 3. Probably because it's a lot more cheap. So they reduce the damage on it.
Hey, what's up, Sportsy?
The big hope with shield when he decides to fly with it is I hate it when he gets to the left wall. Like, I don't want that, but it's also really hard for me to manipulate that. And of course, with Storm's 3A, we can just basically beat anything. Another key thing about Magneto, when he taunts you, anytime he has his arms crossed and he just, like, yells at you for being an X-Men, he's not open because he can cancel out of anything, but because of Storm's range, she can pretty much beat any of it as long as her timing is good. The other characters have to wait until he laughs. If he's laughing, he commits. Like, he can't actually cancel out of that. And it's a free hit. As you can see, he could have fireballed me while I moved up there, and he didn't. I was willing to play those odds. Fortunate shield there. Shield really is the big detractor of time. That was an unfortunate situation because I wanted to show mutant power off in terms of how it breaks shield. Because you can throw mutant power at any point to just have shield turn off. But he shot his energy beam at the same time, and we traded. Mine doesn't do any damage. If he breaks shield, he doesn't take damage. He just doesn't. He just loses his shield. But yeah, there's the cyclical Magneto fight. Got a sub 29, much less a sub 30. I was really happy with that because my previous PB that was deathless was a 30XX. 30. It was either a 30 or like a really low 31. But getting a sub 30 was pretty cool, and I didn't quite hammer home the fact for myself that this really is that much faster.
Had to fight back with some puns. Bear with me.
Than the 4-player version. I mean, yeah, you got the screen scrolls and whatnot, and that's the big reason for it, but I don't know. Sometimes, even though the grouping strats don't quite work out as well, it seems like there's less enemies overall, even if some segments have the same number of enemies. Or more or less. Get these awesome ending credits. The other thing I love about the 6P version, and I'm more than willing to, like, you know, just let it derate through this, at the end of the credits, when it shows the X-Men logo, you actually get portraits of all 6 characters, and I think that was how they were presented on the arcade. I don't want to say the marquee art, but some of the artwork that pertained to the game itself. And of course, I love the comic panel art. That's just classic. Another thing to note, I think I also mentioned this in 4P submission. You don't have the option of being able to continue the game. You know, the meme of the game is not over yet, and it starts you back on another loop. But here, not so much.
You don't get that luxury.
All right, that's X-Men Arcade. I hope the 6P version is up for consideration. I think the game is incredibly fun, and I've very much enjoyed the time I spent with it, even if it's not in the leaderboard sense of the capacity as a speed run, but with the amount of time I put into it, trying to make sure that I can always get a 1 credit clear, you know, pop in your quarter and get it, which I've attempted a few GDQs in the past, some with success, some not. Then I just enjoyed very much what I've gotten out of this game. You can speedrun it to 1 credit on the 2-player Japanese version, but unfortunately that's not available on any home consoles, so I stick to running one of these. Hope you all enjoyed, consider, and have a great day. Take care.